Shalom, shalom. Good morning. I would like to today, again, in this teaching, pin it on the tree of life. I'm going to take a theological construct and I'm going to break it down with keys, and we're going to pin it on the tree of life, which is the systematic theology of our Torah. There is a total lockdown way in which to interpret it. Paul says there's no other foundation than that which is laid. And that kind of refers to how you parse, rightly divide the scriptures. So proof text today is going to be Isaiah 5:1, where it starts out here, I will sing for my beloved a song for my vineyard. Okay, right there, again, we're not telling a history, we're not giving, a person, and we are talking some allegorical language here. So how do you correctly, rightly divide allegorical language is sort of what I want to touch on today. Because that's what I'm about discovering, that it's fascinating. And you don't have to make anything up, and everything is there, and all our schisms and differences, and it could be totally smooth, understood and integrated when we come back to this tree of life, systematic theology that has been held by the rabbis in the house of Judah for millennia. Now, I just have to say that as an intro. Many people have heard it a million times because, I just don't know who's listening, and I just think it's like foundational to know my presupposition. Now, there's a very famous concept that's getting on the radar of Ephraim. Ephraim is Christianity today. The best part of Ephraim would be today, you're really rock solid, sold out Christian. And we're understanding the Jubilees. We're beginning to understand the cycles that are built in to the Gilgal, the way the rotation of times and seasons and their deeper spiritual significance, what it really means. And one of them is the Jubilee. Now, the Jubilee is a concept of counting time. One of its aspects is its purpose is to help count time. And that's why you have this called this book of Jubilees that literally counts time according to this system. But it's 49 years, and then the 50th year, which is the first year of the next cycle, becomes a special year, which becomes the 50th year. So it's right away, you're seeing duality. You're seeing a year that is part of the old cycle, but is actually the beginning of the new cycle. I mean, just ponder that. We could just ponder that and just, end the video there. But that's just that. I'm not going down that rabbit trail, but this is what I'm saying. The word is deep and needs to be pondered on many levels. But on the Jubilee year, what we're beginning to understand, it says, is that in the Jubilee, all land will return to its original owner. Okay, now on the Parashah level, that sounds great. It sounds like, hey, if I had a beach on the house, if my ancestors had a beach on the house in the Jubilee year, I get it back. I mean, it had a beach on the shore, on the ocean. Oh, why can't I say correctly? Had a house on the ocean. Okay, so many thoughts swirling. So anyways, again, each person, the concept will return to his own property. Ancestral, meaning there's a root system too. Again, ponder that. We don't own each other's property, so to speak. We have a plot. We have been given a very specific inheritance, a plot. You study the tribes, they had geographic locations, and for good reason. So we're dealing with this concept of the land now being tied into the Jubilee, all right, and the owner. So you have three components there. You have the time, the Jubilee, the counting of this space of time, 49 years, the 50th year. You have the person and who returns to his quote unquote land. Okay, so now let's parse that out correctly, biblically, theologically. So one of the main concepts to understand when you're doing allegorical language, when you're trying to, what it is to extract the honey, to just get to the meat, the really good cooked, seasoned meat of the meal, so to speak. Okay, there are all ways. There's 4 levels of analogy and comparison, always, that are moving through the scriptures. That this is what the prophets know, and this is a license sort of given to the prophets as they talk to Elohim. I mean, it really is kind of what would be the word, telepathic communication. They are in a spatial reality. Now, whatever it looks like, with Yahweh Elohim, the Most High God. Okay, so that's a given in this. Now, in this concept is there are 4, and they get this from nature. Now, let me just say one more thing, because I've taught a lot on this, that Hebrew is the Lashon HaKadosh. It is the holy language. It is the DNA of creation. Those 22 Hebrew letters, they are way more than just like, you know, the letters of a language. They are glyphs. They contain and they hold supernal divine energy consciousness. However that happens, God has figured out how to do it. Now, these, so you have 4 ways in which you can do it, but I want to just touch on this, is how if there's a progression. There's always a very logical, linear progression. You have what is called silent in nature. These are states of being in nature, okay? And they always use nature because nature doesn't lie. Nature is consistent. So one thing we can count on, basically, even with all its turmoil. Growing, okay, moving, and upright. You remember, you've heard the expression, or ever heard it said that Adam became an upright being. Well, it's not put in there for some arbitrary, oh, isn't that nice he stood up to, like, no, there's great significance in his hierarchical position. So let me just go back now to these and say that this is, when we get into upright Adam, there is a lot of imagery that talks about Yahweh being, they call it anthropomorphic. He's got hands and he's got feet and he breathes and he talks and he moves, you know, all these kind of humanistic things. Okay, that's a definite, legitimate anthropomorphic way. And that's comparing Yahweh to the man and is in an upright position. This is Adam at his best. Okay, the next one is moving. Well, let me put it this way. Let me go back to this before. If you notice, there's a progression here. Seriously, you could say this is the first cell, this is the amoeba, this is, and then it starts to grow. You know, this is the whole concept of sacred geometry, the flower of life. These things grow. You start with, this could even be put, you start with a thought. Just, you start with a seed. You start with something very silent, you know, very, it's not really doing much, a stone, okay? Then it starts a process. It starts growing. And if you know anything, you know, again, get into sacred geometry a little bit, because I'm telling you, that's our inheritance. God is math. Math is God. You know, he's very, very perfect in all of his ways, which is included in all of his unfolding. Very mathematical. Okay. Then you go from there, the growing thing, and this is plants. So in other words, let me tell you that this usually relates to minerals. They'll equate it, like they'll use the word gold and silver and these things, which will, in an, you know, talk about a state of science, but they're coding, they're giving information according to this type of a mentality, because we're all talking about intellectual ideas. How do you tell people about God and his immanence and how he's working all around us all the time? Growing, okay? So he's magnifying, he's growing, he's increasing. We're moving, okay? So once you start growing a plant kingdom, so this is the plant kingdom, okay? Plants grow, they get planted, you know, pretty in the ground, pretty silent, but then lo and behold, that thing grows, and it's just something amazing. I mean, all right, the plant kingdom is no secondary to any of these in a way. No, I shouldn't say that. It's just the plant kingdom is so worthy of the title Elohim because it's just splendid in all of its manifestations. Moving. Okay, so something then, this is the animal kingdom. And this is where it talks about 4-footed or, you know, even 8 feet. You see, most animals have some kind of appendages. The point is they can get up off their little plot of land and they can move around. Okay, that's a higher evolved species. So we're moving up in hierarchy in terms of capabilities and freedoms and choices. All right, so you know, something that's moving, and then you get into upright, and this is Adam. This is the human. This is what the Father made on the 6th day. This is his pinnacle of creation. right? So now that's something you need to understand, how there's a definite reason why, and there's a hierarchy. And when they, and another thing I said, sometimes they will always refer to, like, in the moving, in the animal kingdom. And then they will usually, like, sometimes make references and pull out, all sorts of analogies, but that's why you get the lion of the tribe of Judah. Then, because the lion is the king of the animal kingdom. So everybody knows, the Lion King. He just, that's the one principal main huge animal in the animal kingdom. So they're not, nothing's arbitrary. I think it's very cemented and concrete. And even a child can take that and watch the Lion King and understand, oh yeah, the lion's a pretty cool animal. Okay, so this is an important way, an understanding to have. Okay. Now, as we move into this, what I started in Isaiah 5:1, and I was going to tackle this concept. We're in the plant kingdom, or we're in the vegetable kingdom where things are growing. All right. In Isaiah 5:1. Now let me read this to you. Okay, so what I want to just, let me bring that back to the Jubilee. Okay, because I don't want to. Because it points out that the person is going to inherit their original land again. Okay, so we have to understand what it's referring to with land. Okay, because when you understand the scriptures on the level of PaRDeS, which I teach, you understand there are always deeper meanings that refer to our psychological and our spiritual development, which are just as real and actually more real, because they are, even now, human, man, person, immortal. Our flesh is not immortal, but our soul and our spirit are immortal. So actually, they are much more important components. And the Torah is absolutely full of information on these, expressing these, but we just don't know that today. We think Freud invented psychology. Okay, so when you get into this level of growing, the vegetative state, and we're talking about a vineyard, okay? Now, let me read to you, and what I want to establish. Well, all right, here. I'll go to the commentaries, because if you read deeply, the sages and the Talmud, the commentaries, the Midrash, these are the discussions. It's like just getting in on the Bible study of the greatest Torah minds, and how they are understanding the scriptures and trying to help disciples understand the language and what's being implied. That's always going, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's always trying to usurp the word, because you can't usurp the word, because the word refers to the 22 letters. So even if you're trying to say, oh, it's in this translation or that translation or this tradition, you're totally off the mark anyways, because that's not what it's talking about. So anyways, this idea of a vineyard. Okay, now a vineyard, so in the writings, it'll explain to you how the word vineyard is being used, okay, which is equating now to our word land, all right, because you plant a vineyard, if you have a vineyard, and we know that you have many vineyards, and those are the lands, many families inherited lands of vineyards, okay, along others had olive tree vineyards, all sorts of agricultural, but that's all different teachings, parts of this. But vineyards is a metaphor for God's people. So if we're going to take something in the animal kingdom, we're going to take something that's moving in this category. Plants. Remember, he planted a vineyard. He's in the garden. Okay. So then it's a metaphor for God's people. All right. And this, we have to understand something. If you're a Jew and listening, it includes the house of Israel. It includes the Christians, or those who have attached themselves to the God of Israel, even in this dispensation. If you're a Christian, then you have to understand you are part of what is called all Israel, which today in age is called the reunification of all Israel, or all of God's people, coming back under the God of Israel. The children of Abraham coming back to the God of Abraham. So the vineyard then is a metaphor for God's people. He planted a vineyard. Now, if you really have broad reading and understanding in the Torah scriptures, especially in the esoteric works, you find out that somebody else planted a vineyard. Okay, and we're not going to go down there, but just, okay, meditate, think about that. Somebody else planted a vineyard, and it became a cursed plant, or a cursed vineyard. But we'll get to that. Those are whole different teachings, but you need to understand these things. Contrast. So our vineyards, so there's two ways that in the Torah that vineyards can be are exemplified. All right. A vineyard can be either flourishing or can be devastated. All right. I mean, you can either be prosperous, may you be prosperous at PROSPEROUS sometimes. And may you be prosperous and in health. That's, out of the New Testament. Or you can be devastated. Oh my gosh, why am I feeling I can't even spell today? Devastated. Okay. Now, and that's true. And this is talking about it if the vineyard, who is God's people. So now and this is what it's talking about. He planted me. He planted you in, it says bloom where you're planted. He planted you in this energetic place called the world. All right. And you are going to either prosper or you're going to be devastated. Your vineyard, your life. Okay. Now, and I'm going to give you, to prove this, my first proof will be out of the commentary, like I said, which is these are the greatest Torah minds trying to explain to the people who don't have time to do all this. It's not their calling. They're called to work out in the vineyard, literally the field, whatever. Get these deep levels of Torah understanding. So it needs interpreters. It's what they're called, interpreters of the law. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what the priests were supposed to do. Always teach the people the spiritual significance of everything so they could stay connected, unconsciousness to the highest levels of God consciousness. Now, he says here in Rashi's commentary. Now, Rashi is one of the greatest medieval Bible commentators. All right, so you should read. Any teacher should always, in my opinion, check Rashi's commentary. You can get it in many books, but on Chabad, a great Jewish site, they will always have the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and then Rashi's commentary, verse by verse, because it gives you incredible insights into how they understood these scripture verses on their literal Peshat level. But if you don't have that right, it's like you're not going to get anything right. And alluding to some of the deeper ways. But Rashi says, so when the vineyard was covered with thorns and thistles, see, this is how it's used. When Adam and Eve sinned and it talked about their progeny, her progeny was going, Adam, his field, he just planted a vineyard. People, oh my gosh, I got to keep this G-rated, I guess. You could get R-rated so quickly in the scriptures with their understanding of how, oh my gosh, sexuality is such a huge part of what we're involved in the creation process, and what either we are producing vineyards that are going to be plenteous and healthful and prosperous, or we're going to be producing vineyards that are covered with thorns and thistles, weeds, worthless, nothing worth it, just pull them up by the roots and get rid of them. They're not doing, okay. This is important imagery to kind of ingest. That's what it means to eat. Take it in, and whoa, do you really get the full impact of that? So Rashi says, when the vineyard is covered with thorns and thistles, it means that these are men you are ruled by, or you are filled with, or your men, your people are people skilled in evil, devoted to, this is what sun worship. I'll come back and unpack that. Takers of bribes, pursuing, oh my gosh, I can't read. Pursuing, I don't know what that last word would be, but pursuing wickedness would be a perfectly adequate fill-in. But these are men, okay, skilled in evil, devoted to sun worship, takers of bribes, pursuing evil, wickedness. But they are sun worshipers. In other words, this is the concept. When you understand the tree of life, you understand the seven, how do I even say this in a quick, succinct way? The sun is known as Zeranpin, and this is something that is common to all mankind, but the point is, you can use Zeranpin and you can take credit for it yourself. To be a sun worshiper, which is quite even sun, S-U-N, because the sun, again, if we're in a category, if we're in the silent world, which the sun is in the silent world, it's there and it never, but it is the kingpin, like the lion of the celestial skies, right? Okay, so saying that these men are skilled, they take credit. When you sun worship, it's like making yourself a god. Oh, look at what my hands have made. That's what they all look at what my hands have made. So you take credit for everything. When really the Father is giving you everything you need, and He's allowing you to be a co-creator with Him. But no, the wicked, the godless have to take the credit to themselves and think that they're doing it. So this is an important understanding. So today, anybody, I mean, I'm not going to call myself a prophet, but I say anyone with a prophetic voice today would be saying, wow, aren't our vineyards devastated today? I mean, just look at the governmental system we have to deal with. These people are out of their minds. Okay, another whole subject. But we have to understand now, so this concept of the vineyard can be, full of health and plenteous. That's the concept of living in a land of milk and honey, or this land of thorns and thistles. Okay, now let's go back to reading Isaiah 5:1, and I'm going to get into some other couple of more verses to continue to confirm other confirming witnesses on this concept. Now let me this is another little deeper nuance. Just want to say this. See, souls, when I talk about the vineyard is a metaphor for God's people. And really, even it says in John 5:15:1, Yeshua saying, I am the true vine, and my Father is the keeper of the vineyard. See, all that language is being carried forward by our New Testament writers who are actually, Nazarene, Essene, Jewish Torah teachers, writers, apostles, prophets at the time. But the soul. So another way is, here's another key insert, the lily. You ever heard of Yeshua? It's called the lily of the valley, okay? Now, the vineyard, as I said, is a metaphor for God's people. And again, the lily is, because you're in a vineyard, it can be a vineyard, but it doesn't always have to be a great vineyard. It's that there's a planting, that there's a huge growth. It could be trees. I mean, there's where the palm trees or the oaks of Bashan, or it talks about the trees of the field. I mean, whatever in this category. Usually, you don't get one lone flower, one lone tree. You get a whole multitude. Okay, it's you know what? Okay, no, these are growing. I put this wrong. Honestly, this category plants. They're growing. Okay, that's what they do. So the land grows its produce. Now, the vineyard with the lily, you've heard, usually the lily of the valley. The lily would be, again, akin to one of the kingpins, like one of the most beautiful flowers. It's not just some little wallflower, it is, I mean, that's why it is the lily. It's just a beautifully formed flower. And there's so much, it has 5 leaves. There's so much about a lily that you can equate into the tree of life. That's why, so it's not used arbitrarily. Again, it's not this teaching. So I want you to see that lily, it again is referring to, in the plant kingdom, the leader of this vineyard. So if the lily is the kingpin of the flowers, of the flower beds that are planted, okay, so then that's a reference to what would be Yeshua, a Mashiach, a great soul. These flowers, because what I want to tell you is, and I'll say it right, flowers are code words again for great souls, great flowers, beautiful flowers, versus a thorn and a thistle, right? So we're always comparing a beautifully sculpted flower, like a lily of the valley, okay, is a very highly developed production. I mean, that's the end product of some kind of process that was growing. That's absolutely beautiful and spectacular. Everybody notices it, comes up to it, admires it, and smells it, and compliments on its color. And so you do that with roses. I mean, things that are beautiful, which are of God, But versus again the thorns and the thistles. Now, this way, what I'm trying to say, the souls are classified as these growing plants. Okay, so when it really talks about we are a plant before the Father. Like I say, I'm a flower unfolding. I feel like my teaching ministry. I'm a flower unfolding the elect life before the Father. Okay, everything I say is out in the open before Him, most of all, Yod He Vav He, and I feel approved. Okay, so I don't feel like I have to go and hide my whatever. I don't want to get off on this. So what I'm just trying to say is understanding how they're using this concept of the vineyard as a planting of Adonai, and it represents our souls. Because ultimately, listen, again, He's come here to save our soul. Our body, we know, is going to perish. We're going to receive, in the final analysis, a immortal body. But that's just, that is actually the crowning point of all creation when that happens. That's at the resurrection. That's also what the Jubilee is pointing to. There will be a time where I will go back to my original estate, my original land, my body, my soul will go back to the original body that was in Yahweh's mind, created for me, that was free from all sickness, sin, death, anything negative. Okay, so these are important this is how it's used. So soul, so you could really say what you need is the condition of the soul. And souls can either be, beautiful manifestations of some incredible intelligence who knew how to make something amazing, or, a lot of times, and there's a lot of mimicking goes on in the thorn and thistle, weeds and things category. So, and you can see this if you look at all these verses, and we'll read how they use these plant analogies to impart so much deep understandings about our psychology and our soul. Okay, now going back to Isaiah 5:1. So it says, I will tell you what I'm about to do with my vineyard. So the Father's saying, look, I planted quote unquote my people, and look what happened. So He says, my beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill. Now I just want to tell you, my beloved, that's the RMP, and that is the sun. The vineyard, of course, is the planting, but the fertile hill, these are representing, if you understand hierarchy, hills and mountains, high levels, again, of souls, of God's consciousness. All right, so because who's God? God is doing this, okay? I mean, this is happening. He is molding and shaping and pruning and planting and translating his vineyard. All right, which is, we can, because if you've ever been a gardener, a lot of this prompts us, I love gardening. It's beautiful. And gardening always makes me just think of all this and like, oh, how brilliant. That is so true when I rip up a really nasty, which grows so quick. Okay, so my beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted the finest vines. He built a watchtower in the middle, dug out a wine press as well. He waited for the vineyard to yield good grapes. Or in other words, he waited for the vineyard, the seeds that he had planted in the ground, the whole thing, to produce what it was coded to do, good grapes. Oh, all right. Now we're going to get down to, we're going to flip around and say, okay, well, that was all pretty allegorical language. Now he's going to say, okay, now I'm going to talk plainly, you dwellers of Jerusalem and you men of Judah. Now this is a reference, is when you see language like this, I have to tell you that is referring to the house of Judah. This is the Jews. Jerusalem and Judah are many times coded in for the house of Judah because that's what they were known for. You knew Judah, the southern part, because that's where the temple was. That's where the holy city was. That's where Zion, the Temple Mount. Okay, always. And the dwellers of Jerusalem and the men of Judah was the tribe that morphed into, basically, and absorbed others that came into it, became known as what we see today is quote unquote Israel today. And at the time of even the second temple, that was the known, visible, and that's where the point, Judah is a lot of times equated as a tree. Too much information. But a tree is something that's taller than a vineyard. You can see it easier. Oh, I could go on and on. I exhort you to judge between me and my vineyard. All right, people, it's not like look at this. What more could I have done for my vineyard than I already did it? When I expected sweet grapes, it brought forth sour fruit. I mean, I didn't do. No, this is the Father understand. He's saying, I took them out of Egypt. I gave them my Torah. I taught them my secrets. I gave them great leadership. I healed their bodies, their minds, their souls, and their spirits. I just sent them out to say, okay, now you know how to do it. You go out and teach the nations. Is that so hard? But he said, now I will tell you. So, but that didn't happen. And we know that because of the different exiles, the first exile and the destruction of the first temple, the second one, Judah, just like Christianity, has had a really hard time living up to its birthright responsibilities. I will take away its head, Yahweh says, and it will be consumed. I will tear down its walls, and it will be trampled. And I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated. So in other words, he's just going to leave it to the elements. Okay, and this is how many times in history, if you look back, I mean, sometimes you can say it feels like God's hand is off. We feel like God's hand is off. Many feel like God's hand is off their life personally. Well, if that's the case, you better go and do a checkup from the neck up, and like, what's your soul condition? Are you growing up towards the Lord? Is your Ruach bringing you up towards God, or is your Ruach bringing you down into negativity and into God denying and God hating? Very important. Okay. The thorns and thistles will grow up if you don't take care of your vineyard. Now he says, I will command the clouds that no rain will fall on it. Now, this number 7 is a very important verse, and this is interesting, and I swear they did this on purpose. But in this Isaiah 5:1, these numbers are all important. This is in verse 7, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts. And in verse 3, he said, now, O dwellers of Jerusalem, where he really concretely, they tell you who they are talking to. Because you have to know one of the main things is, if a message isn't for you, don't receive it. Okay? And you need to know kind of who is it being addressed to. So for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel and the men of Judah. These are the plants of his delight. Okay, so right there in the verses, if you don't understand the two houses now, if you don't see that clearly, this is Isaiah. This is the Prince of Prophets. Nobody really had one of the highest levels of God consciousness and could think and see and hear and meditate and talk on these very high levels and really get the big picture and how it was going to impact Israel down the millennium. Because once you understand this stuff, you can totally understand cause and effect, and you can prophesy quite accurately. So he looked for justice. So that's why I wanted to just point out, that's who we're talking to. All right, it's not ambiguous at all. So that Christian, that's you're the house of Israel. We are returning. We are the prodigal that went astray, and now we're returning to what? The Father's house. He looked for justice, the Father did, but what did he see? Bloodshed. There was no righteousness, but he heard a cry of distress, inequality, oppression, injustice, master and servant relationships, male and female, gender thing, all the relationships get distorted and get perverted. Okay. All right. So this is now the vineyard, God's people. All right. And it's a constant thing. It's a constant struggle in every generation. It does, but that's why the leaders and the elders in every generation are going to be held more responsible, because they are put in charge as the shepherds of to guide the generation spiritually. And you can have good leaders and you can have really bad leaders, and then we all suffer accordingly, as we are doing today. So let's just go over a couple other verses to confirm this. So in John 15:1, he says again, I said, and I am the true vine, and my Father is the keeper of the vineyard. So again, we're grafted into what? We're grafted into a plant that's already been growing. The Father is eternal. The Son, who is part of the Father, I mean, it's not like there's any separation here. We're just allegorically, anthropomorphically pulling out different relationships to explain different things that are relationships that are happening in the Godhead. So then in Psalm 80.8, then this is a true tautology, which is a form of rhetoric, where confirming something, okay, a way of comparison, so that A equals B. I am it says, you uprooted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and transplanted them. See, here's interesting. You uprooted a vine from Egypt. What vine did we know get uprooted from Egypt? Well, that was Jacob and his progeny that had grown and morphed and was now a multitude of people in Egypt. It's exactly that. You uprooted a vine from me. You took your people out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and transplanted them. Conversely, and this is what's interesting in this verse, he's saying how he took out with a strong arm, right hand, his vine from Egypt. But then in another instance, he drove out the nations, his nations, house of Israel and house of Judah, and transplanted them in other lands. So no matter how you look at it, we are talking about a vineyard as God's people in these contexts. In Jeremiah 12:10, it says, many shepherds have destroyed my vineyard. They have trampled my plot of ground, turned my pleasant field into a desolate wasteland. Did I just say that? You know, if your leadership goes south, the people mostly go south. This is a very important thing. But my shepherds, I want to say that again, many levels. We have many levels of authority over us. Adamite, you don't know. We always kind of go from us to God, thinking it's us and then there's God over us and there's nobody, no intermediaries in between. No, see, and this is what you're saying. There are many hierarchical, and this is that are called the angels that influence, that have jurisdiction over us, that rule over us. That see, because the angels are the ones who, okay, if we get a judgment or a blessing, they're the ones that bring it to us. They're sort of like in the relationship of our DNA. You know, we have a coded something in our DNA. It's so deep, people, that in an auspicious time, at a certain time, you think it's an accident that on a certain day, at a certain time, in a certain place, you're meeting your future mate? No, it's already been coded. And if you're in the right place at the right time and you've been tracking, you know, you're going to run into your destiny. Oh, it's just on so many levels. But anyways, many shepherds have destroyed my vineyard. They have trampled my plot of ground. They have turned my pleasant field into a desolate wasteland. So in other words, so this is why we fight against not just flesh and blood, not just wicked people. And this today, people, is the message. This is the word. We are not just fighting flesh and blood today. We are fighting principalities and powers in high places. In other words, we have allowed the literal other side, demonic, fallen angelic energy intelligences that can shapeshift into human form, because it's all in the text story, and they are ruling over us. And we really have a problem. And they're called shepherds. In many places, they're the craftsmen, they're the shepherds, they're the judges. There's higher intelligences that rule over us that most people are totally unaware of. But the Torah text and the Torah sage is perfectly conversant with that. So we need to get up to that speed. And in Isaiah 10:1, which again, I don't think I have, but I do have Song of Songs. Again, here, one of the most enigmatic, esoteric, occulted, hidden, this is over, because the language is used totally on the deep sewed level. They give you no hints on how to interpret it in terms of just a regular, try to, you know, even get the shot level out of it. It's very, but I want to just give you how it uses vineyard. Now I will sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. Beloved has a vineyard my beloved has a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. See, there is those who are the true shepherd of Israel. Again, there's always good and there's always bad. There's a good leadership, bad leadership, and even in the angelic realm, people. This is the point. Okay, Michael is a good leader, archangel for Israel. All right, others are, but it's important to understand that he has the vineyard. We are his people. He is pruning us even on a personal level. If he's getting weeds and chasing you, trying to clean you up and make you a beautiful, splendid flower unfolding before the let it happen. Let it happen, because you cannot grow. This is why a lot of people cannot get into their ministry. I want to say this, because if you want to get into the moving category, you want to get on the move with God, here, this is it. Okay, because a lot of people feel stuck in there. They know the Father loves them. They know that they're, you know, have a calling and destiny. They're part of this bigger thing, but they can't seem to get moving. Believe me, I've been there. I get it. Because in order to, and this will be the next teaching on this whole concept as we move into from growing into from growing into moving, which is the animal state, and how the animal kingdom is used to describe levels of our soul life. And if you're not moving, it's because you have not tamed your animal self, your animal soul. Bottom line. So that's something that we'll tackle in the next episode. And so I hope you enjoy that. And I hope today with spring, with everything unfolding in all of its beauty, nature gives Yahweh glory, because it is the imminent expression of his perfection, his beauty, his cosmic intelligence on just so many levels. So on that note, enjoy, and let's have a season. This is what a lot of times the festivals are. I want to say our seasons are designed to help us get into this state, tending our soul life, doing some plucking, forgiving, pulling things up, getting things out. So it's always in a growing mode. It's always in a process. But today we need to kick it up a notch, and we need a lot of lions in the tribe of Judah people, to start getting bold as a lion, because we got to start moving in the direction faster and quicker than godliness, because evil is on the move. So blessings, shalom, shalom, and I will see you in the next recording.